Well, on the 21st anniversary of September 11th, Tulsi Gabbard tweeted out, hashtag never forget our fellow Americans killed on 9/11 by jihadists. The radical Islamist ideology that motivated that attack, distinct from the religion Islam, remains the greatest long-term threat to the world. But our foolish, short-sighted leaders ignore this fact. Well, after which Tulsi received an enormous amount of pushback, even from many who tend to agree with her on other issues, including myself. Well, Scott Horton is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and author of Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. Scott, I'm going to assume you did not agree with Tulsi Gabbard on this tweet.
Well, she makes a few different points in there, all of which I agree with to various degrees and have my own spin on. So my criticism is probably not exactly what everyone else is saying, maybe. But for example, when she says that Al-Qaeda and like groups are the greatest threat to peace and security in the world, I'm paraphrasing whatever exactly was,
right.
That I agree with that. But another way of looking at that is that the rest of the nation states of the world are essentially behaving themselves and getting along. And there are no powers that threaten the United States, certainly anywhere in the world. Even Al-Qaeda, when they attacked us 21 years ago, had to hijack our airliners to even have a weapon of any effect to use against us.
Right.
And so it's true that they are the greatest threat in the world. Whether they're capable of bringing down Western governments or something like that, if that's the implication, well, of course, that's not really right. Whether they could destroy our society, but they can get us to destroy it. And we've seen that over the last 20 years. And that was really bin Laden's game. And so now to the question of the jihadist ideology. Well, first of all, I mean, jihadist can be used lots of ways. It's sort of, inside Islam, depending on the person and the context. It can be used very generally speaking for any sort of difficult struggle with your own self or with, your faith in God or whatever, these kinds of things. So that could be very general. But she does get more specific there and say those who are fighting in the name of this Islamist ideology. And by ist there, I don't know exactly the Latin, but what that means is we're talking about they're not content to be Muslims. They demand to see a state system run by Islam, right? Which is different than having a nationalist state or a republic or a monarchy or a whatever different kind of choices that you have, a military dictatorship. They want an Islamic state. Well, that's true about the leaders of Al-Qaeda. That was ultimately their motivation to attack the United States, ultimately all the way down the chain, was that they wanted to overthrow their own governments and have their sultanate, their caliphate, and do things their way. And they saw that we were in their way, that America supports every dictatorship in the region, every monarch, every El Presidente, sock puppet military dictator, client state. And they said, how can we ever win a revolution locally if the American superpower is always here to back up our enemies here? So they wanted to take their fight to us first. So that, to me, is the critical distinction, right? Is the question is not who are they, really. It's why are they doing what they're doing? And the answer to that is not just what they want, but it's what we are doing that makes them figure that they have to attack us first. And now that we're asking that important question, the answer is we're supporting dictatorships. We're supporting His Royal Highness, the monarch of Kuwait and Saudi and UAE and Bahrain and Qatar, and some of them call themselves sultans or emirs. It's the same thing. This is America, the oldest republic in the world that, we celebrate every year our independence from the absolutely ridiculously illegitimate monarchy of Great Britain, just as so many nations around the world do. Celebrate our independence from that absolutely illegitimate old world or old school or medieval kind of system of government. And so that's what turned them against us, is that we were intervening over there. They didn't hate us for being free. They didn't hate us for being a majority white Christian culture or anything like that. They didn't hate us for minding our own business. Imagine this narrative that they convinced the American people that here in America, where we have freedom of religion, where literally millions of Muslims live and work and practice their faith in peace and freedom. Oh boy, bin Laden hates that. oh, he hates that we're all so free that millions of Muslims live here happily practicing their religion. No, that wasn't it at all. It was America occupying bases in Saudi Arabia that they used to kill Iraqis. It was American support for Israeli crimes against the Lebanese and the Palestinians. And again, especially American support for those dictatorships. So that's how bin Laden's group of Saudis and Jordanians teamed up with Ayman al-Zawahiri's group of Egyptians and formed this group, Al-Qaeda, to focus on the United States. And so anyway, back to what she's saying. Sorry for the long answer, but back to what she's saying there is it's true that that's who they are. Just like it's true that we are a majority white Christian culture in the United States. That doesn't mean that that's why we do what we do. And to confuse those two issues is essentially it's to absolve the United States of their previous foreign policies. As Ron Paul instructed Rudy Giuliani, if we think that we can just go around the world killing people and act like there will be no consequence, that we can just get away with it and do whatever we want, then we do that at our own peril. Yeah. We end up finding out the very hard way. Right. When things like September 11th happen.
So I guess one of the criticisms that we see, going back to Tulsi's tweet in particular, and some of the things that she said when she's on Tucker Carlson's show or during other appearances, is this idea that we need to fight them. So yes, many of us would agree that it is Islamist ideology, which is different from the actual religion of Islam. It's a sect. It's a much more conservative, orthodox style of form of the religion. And many of us would be, many Muslims in the world, most Muslims in the world would be very uncomfortable living under it. It's extremely conservative and strict. And so I guess the question is, do we fight it? Because that seems to be some of the sentiment is, okay, maybe not regime change wars, maybe not overthrowing some of these dictators, but instead using this over-the-horizon style battle, which we're now seeing in Afghanistan, right? We're seeing that, yes, we ended the war. Technically, we don't have boots on the ground in Afghanistan, but what we are doing is we are still droning, right? We're still using other types of weaponry and other types of reconnaissance and other type of warfare in order to continue going after this Islamist ideology. Is that the smart thing to be doing?
Well, that's a great way to put it. And, I'll draw you to a couple of examples from our recent history here. In Iraq War II, you had a real, ugly group of bin Ladenite type fighters in Zarqawi's group Al-Qaeda in Iraq that fought against the Americans. And eventually the local Sunni Iraqi population, not the Shiites were driving the Sunnis right into Al-Qaeda's arms with America's help. But the local Sunnis eventually got sick and tired of the jihadists' antics and started betraying them, stabbing them in the back. Their allies, right? It wasn't David Petraeus that got rid of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was the local Iraqi Sunni tribal leaders who said, enough of this. We don't want to live like Saudis. You guys, get the hell out of here. Mm-hmm. And ended up marginalizing them. It wasn't until Barack Obama came and saved them by giving them billions of dollars in a brand new mission to fight in Syria that ended up leading to the creation of the caliphate and then Iraq War III. But if you look at the drone war, Obama, he launched this massive surge in Afghanistan. Terrible. And at the same time, though, he launched what he thought was smart. And you characterized it well as far as how they would characterize it, right? That, listen, we don't want to do these giant escalations, even though we're doing one in Afghanistan right now, but we don't want to do any more big Iraq War II type things. But we really do want to kill the last of bin Laden's friends and the last of the real Al-Qaeda guys in the world. So we know now from John Kiriakou, the CIA officer, 29 Al-Qaeda guys hiding in Pakistan somewhere that they wanted to kill. And so they teamed up with the Pakistani government. They waged a massive drone war, 2009 through, I guess, about 14, 15. And during that, they had to make a compromise with the Pakistani government that they would help the Pakistani government hunt and kill the leaders of the Tariqi Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban that's separate from America's enemies in Afghanistan, have nothing to do with our war there. But that's our compromise with the Pakistani government for them letting us kill a couple of dozen Arabs hiding out in no man's land there, right? Well, that leads to a giant war. Now that we're helping the Pakistani military do it, They launch a massive invasion of the tribal territories. They kill 80,000 something people, create tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees. And then you won't be surprised to know that this is the origin story of Afghan ISIS. Because just as the Afghan Taliban would go and take safe haven across the border in Pakistan, here you have Pakistani Taliban hiding across the line in Afghanistan, seeking safe haven from the Pakistani government, where eventually the CIA and the Afghan National Army tried to recruit them and use them against the Afghan Taliban, until later, during the Syrian war at the same time, they ended up later hoisting the black flag and declaring their loyalty to the Islamic State. And they've been doing nothing but suicide bombings in Afghanistan, slaughtering innocent Shiites and innocent school children and God knows what ever since then. And that was a monster that came directly out of America's war on terrorism with a drone, not a 3rd Infantry Division. This is a surgical strike using a scalpel, a 500-pound bomb. Oh, also, we have to make a deal with the Pakistani government that turns the region further upside down, right? Same thing in Yemen. Obama says, I want to kill AQAP, real Al-Qaeda guys, not Al-Qaeda-linked nonsense. These are the guys that helped coordinate 9/11, who bombed the USS Cole, who later tried to blow up a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. Real Al-Qaeda terrorists. So what does Obama do? Surgical strikes with a scalpel. What does that mean? It means not thousands and thousands, but it means hundreds and hundreds of dead innocent civilians everywhere, which just radicalizes more people directly into the hands of Al-Qaeda. But he also had to bribe the government of Yemen to let him do it. And the dictator of Yemen took those weapons, waged war against the Houthis in the north. The same Houthis who he later teamed up with I'm skipping a few steps here because it's a mess, but the same guys who came down and took over the capital city in 2015, the very end of 14, beginning of 15, which precipitated Barack Obama then switching sides in that war and taking Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates side against the Houthis, who had only been able to take power as a direct consequence of the deal he had made with the dictator to allow us to bomb his country with our so-called scalpel bombings. And so there is no such thing as just reach out and touch someone and it'll be just fine. Yeah. They all come with these absolute catastrophic results. And by the way, that war ever since then, the last 7 years, has killed hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah, that's no scalpel. Right. That's the Saudis with American help carpet bombing civilians, destroying neighborhoods, bombing hospitals and the waterworks and the full gamut.
So what would be your solution then if it's not, and I agree, I definitely think we shouldn't be meddling in all of this because it just creates disaster after disaster after disaster. And we've seen that. So I don't agree with the idea that we need to take the scalpel and do the surgical strikes and, go in. And that is something that I have disagreed with Tulsi on about whether or not we should be going into Africa and doing these special operations to target these Islamists. Instead, I think maybe the better thing to do is to leave it alone and really to understand that a lot of people radicalize because they're poor, they don't have anything else to do. You get these young men, they're bored, they don't see any future, and it's easier for them to get sucked into this ideology that if they follow these, that God will one day reward them with something much greater than what this life has to offer them. If they,
we're bringing the fight to them. We're bringing them a fight for them to participate in. Where otherwise, they might have to figure out and get a job.
Exactly. So maybe there's a better.
Join.
Yeah. So do you have another solution? I mean, do you think that there should be any sort of fighting at all? Or are you sort of where I'm at, where it's like maybe we should be economically helping these areas? Because fewer people would just want to be joining this if they had something else to do.
Well, I mean, I'm a firm believer, ideologically speaking, but also absolutely practically speaking, that our government should just bug off and leave everyone in the world, including us, the hell alone. And then we, the American people, can feel free to engage in any kind of commerce with any people in the world and not have to worry about being a hypocrite and being an interventionist and being a part of something that we don't want to be a part of. Yeah. And then, the American people, like in, the founders' wishes and all of their parting speeches and all of that stuff, is that we are supposed to have peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all the nations of the world and entangling alliances with none. And if I have another minute, I'm sorry, I do ramble, but I want to give a little bit of credit to Tulsi Gabbard here. I don't know how well people know this, but first of all, she's currently an active duty, I think, major or higher, a lieutenant in the National Guard there in Hawaii. But she served in Iraq War II at the Balad Air Base in a medical unit. So it only takes a little bit of imagination. I've never heard her talk about this, but it takes very little imagination to realize that she sat there and watched American GIs die screaming for their mama with their guts in their hand after being blown up by bin Ladenite, head chopper, suicide bomber, Al-Qaeda in Iraq maniacs. Like, that was part of her experience. Right. And remember, when she was good on Syria, says we should not be intervening in Syria. And they said, oh, you're a traitor. You love Assad. You're an Assad toady. Said, oh, what's her name? The censorer lady on the Rogan show, right? And then didn't even know what the word toady meant.
Yes, very wise.
What was going on there, right? What was going on there was, unlike everyone else in the House of Representatives, Tulsi Gabbard, because of her experience in the war, she knew the shirts from the skins. She understood who was who. And so when the media said that Al-Qaeda in Iraq, bin Laden, suicide bomber, head chopper maniacs are now moderate rebels and we like them because they're fighting against the Shiites and we hate Iran more because that's what Israel wants or something, she just said, no, that's not good enough. She knew that these are the same guys who, when they're on the Iraqi side of the line, they're the worst devils in the world. Right. Now you're telling me I'm supposed to love them in Syria? Forget it. And so that's why she was good on it. And so she deserves a lot of credit for saying that we have to stop overthrowing these secular governments, taking the side. And we did. Our government, look, W. Bush really helped Al-Qaeda by turning Western Iraq over to them. But that was basically a stupid accident of his war. But Obama deliberately took their side in Libya, Syria, and Yemen, where we've still been on their side since 2015. Yeah. And so this is not even the war against terrorism. This is the war for terrorism. And she's 100% 5-star great on it and says we absolutely should not be doing this. And that it really, truly is the most important thing. But then, as you're saying, essentially, like, if any Sunni with a rifle anywhere in the Middle East or Africa who's not a part of a state army now counts as bin Laden linked enough that we got to send special operations forces after him. Well, that's a whole, you could drive a whole war on terrorism through. And as we've been discussing, half the war on terrorism or more has been the war for terrorism. So if that's what our government is, if that's who our security force is that we're stuck with, that we just keep changing sides in this war back and forth, at least half the time on the side of the guys that knocked our towers down, then I just think it's not rational to ask them to protect us at all in any sense other than just, hopefully doing their job. Maybe we hire private security for this, doing their job to keep people from getting on airplanes to our country from over there, especially if they've ever worked for America or our allies as bin Ladenite mercenaries in any of these wars. These are extremely dangerous people. They really are. But the thing is, again, you give your CIA the mandate to cut their throats, and the CIA will give them a suicide bomb and send them off on a mission against a Shiite. Yeah. Okay? That's the reality of the world that we live in, and so we just can't do it. We just cannot give them the writ anymore.
Well, and I think also what makes Tulsi, and I agree with you on Tulsi, I think she was absolutely very brave to be standing up against pretty much everybody in the government and saying we should be less war, a lot less war. We should not be doing this. She's one of the very few anti-war voices that has been standing up against the military-industrial complex. I think her message still remains pretty consistent. I don't agree with her on some of it, but I do think she's very consistent in that, being against the trying to topple Assad in Syria, for example, or many of these other, brutal dictators that we have gone in and deposed, Gaddafi, Assad, there's Saddam Hussein, right? All of these various these people. But the thing about them is that they at least kept the Islamist radical ideology in check, right, for their countries. So they weren't. Yes, was it a democracy as America goes around the world pretending like that's what we battle for? We help people bring democracy. But like you mentioned early on, yet we still support all of these monarchies throughout the Middle East, which makes zero sense whatsoever. There's no democracy whatsoever in those countries. So why aren't we waging massive wars against those? Instead, we're giving them tons of our weapons. Right.
But you got it right on the point. This is the burden of being an empire. You have to choose. Do you support a military military dictatorship or a bin Ladenite revolution against him.
Right.
Hey, how about we stay out of there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I personally agree that
what got us attacked by the bin
Exactly.
Ladenites in the first place. But now they got us back in the bin Ladenites against the dictators. That's 10 times worse.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, it really is to say, okay, we're fighting these terrorists, but then we go after the dictators that also are fighting the terrorists. So I think it's a very logical and consistent argument to say, that Tulsi has made to say, I'm against all of these regime change wars that ultimately end up bringing more radicalism into the area, while at the same time she then says, and we should do these surgical strikes and fight in Africa, fight throughout the Middle East in these over-the-horizon style special operation, which is what I don't agree with because I think that it should be we just stay out of it entirely, because I do think that those surgical strikes, like you mentioned, just reel out of control and create bigger problems. Ultimately, there is just no way to do a surgical strike and remove the bad guy and only the bad guy. It just doesn't happen. Right. So, definitely, I agree with you. I do have to ask you one last thing. I know, and this is kind of it's a big one last thing, but a lot of people, we just had September 11th, the anniversary of September 11th. So I'm sure a lot of, you're seeing it all over online, a lot of people questioning what was the root cause of September 11th, who was really behind it. Just curious your take on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a complicated mess, and I try not to get too far into it because I don't want to argue with the truthers about every little detail. But I guess to me, essentially the bottom line is that 99% or more of all the truther stuff you've ever heard is wrong. The bombs in the towers and the missile hit the Pentagon and the bombs in Building 7. Building 7 was hit by the North Tower and was damaged severely. All down the whole front of the building was compromised structurally, and then it burned all day. And there are debriefings online. You can read the firefighters. Jimmy the firefighter, not some CIA conspirator, just regular guys, talking about how they knew the building was going to come down for hours before it finally did. It was completely compromised. It was built on this weird core skin construction design. It burned all day on a diesel generator, fueling the flames, and the building collapsed. That was it. And there's just so many little red herrings. Oh, the BBC presenter announced it before it happened. Yeah, but every other news channel in America reported at the exact same time as her that it's about to fall. Clearly, she just got the telephone game wrong in her earpiece from the guy back in London who's telling her what to pretend to report to him, is all that happened there. And G. Edward Griffin, the guy that wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, the greatest New World Order conspiracy theorist of the 20th century, he debunked that the day that the kooks first raised it. Okay, it's been debunked since the day it came out. And that's how all this 9/11 truther stuff is. It's a bunch of crap, except that what? We know that Saudi intelligence paid off these hijackers, protected seemingly these hijackers, and to a great degree, and we're not talking about some kook radical Islamist ideologue inside the royal family. We're talking about Prince Turki and Prince Bandar. So here's the counterfactual for you. Let's go back 21 years and we'll wage the entire war on terrorism against Prince Bandar. And we'll waterboard him. And we'll put him up on the gallows with a rope around his neck and poke him in the side with a pointy thing and tell him, now squeal. If he's got something to say, I would like to hear it. Because frankly, I can't imagine why he would do such a thing unless he thought he had the tacit permission of the Americans to allow that to happen. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that's what happened. I'm just saying that's my limited, pathetic imagination here. The best I can do right now. But I don't like the speculation because almost all of it is wrong.
Right.
And, I do think the Israelis knew about it, but they did not run that cell. All the people that say the Israelis did, I haven't seen anything to be convincing about that.
But they have very good intelligence.
And there's so much stuff. That's all red herrings. The question always was and should have always been from the beginning. What did Saudi Arabian intelligence know about these men, and for that matter, the CIA? What all did they know? When did they know it? And how did they share it? And why not? Etc.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, look, there are completely straw man official stories, right? Like there's the junior high school version of how this happened and everything. But the actual official story is that the FBI, CIA, military, NSA could have prevented the attack if they were doing their job. We all know about Abel Danger. We all know about the FBI memos from Phoenix and Minneapolis that said, hey, what are we doing about this? We all know that there were the agents, Doug Miller, and I'm sorry, I forget his buddy's name, at the CIA Counterterrorism Center, who swear to God that they were forbidden from telling the FBI about the Al-Qaeda guys in the country that the CIA was evidently attempting to recruit, and then didn't, and then just did nothing with it and dropped the ball. So that's even the official story, is that these meathead idiots, of course they could have stopped if they've been doing their job whatsoever. But the FBI cares 1,000 times, 10,000 times more about the FBI than they care about you. And that's the same for CIA. It's the same for the military, for that matter. The same for the NSA. And, you know, the guys at CIA screamed about the FBI locking up all the evidence behind a grand jury where they couldn't get at it. And meanwhile, the FBI was angry the CIA wouldn't share their intelligence with them. And meanwhile, they were both mad at the NSA that was tapping the switchboard house in Yemen, where they were helping to coordinate all of this stuff against us. But NSA would only even give CIA half the, oh, no, they wouldn't share it. So here's the anecdote. CIA had to make their own listening station on Madagascar where they could still only get half the conversation, but they couldn't hear the Afghanistan side of the conversation. And this went on for years before the attack. So all these guys should have gone to prison for criminally negligent homicide. They are all as guilty as the hijackers themselves. They're like the cops that stood outside at Uvalde. It doesn't absolve them that they didn't do it on purpose. It means that they are worthless men who failed in the most spectacular fashion in all of American history to protect the people that they were sworn to protect. And almost always just because of what narrow-minded, pin-headed jerks they all were. And that's the official story, okay? And in fact, I'll tell you, one more as long as I'm ranting. Are we on a time limit here?
No, go ahead.
Okay, there's a guy named Ali Soufan. You can sign up for his morning digest thing. He's a consultant now, whatever. But he's a former FBI counterterrorism agent. He was basically the deputy under John O'Neill at the FBI counterterrorism office. In fact, Monk, the actor that plays Monk, plays him in the movie The Siege with Bruce Willis and Denzel Washington that was written by Lawrence Wright before 9/11. He's the character in there. He's the Muslim FBI agent that the military arrests for being Muslim in that movie, right? Anyway, so Ali Soufan, and you're familiar with Alex Gibney, the very famous documentarian who made Taxi to the Dark Side and a bunch of other, he's a, award-winning documentarian. So Gibney, a few years back, puts out a short video on Twitter. I think hopefully people can find it. And it's Gibney interviewing Ali Soufan and Doug Miller, who's the FBI agent I mentioned a minute ago. The CIA wouldn't let him share intelligence, CIA intelligence with the rest of the FBI. And then his partner, too, whose name, I'm sorry, is escaping me right now. And they're all telling their version of the story as FBI agents of why it's not their fault, basically, right? But this is a very, very realistic tale as told by Ali Soufan. He's working the coal bombing case in Yemen, the day of September 11th. So he gets called into the embassy, AKA CIA headquarters there in Yemen. He goes in the embassy and they say, Ali, you better look at this. And they bring him into the back and they open up a manila folder. And in the manila folder is a chart of everyone who had attended the Malaysia meeting. And he says he can look right at it and he sees these guys did the coal, these guys did 9/11. There it is, right in front of him. And the CIA had it all along, but wouldn't share it with the FBI while we've got 20 real-ass Al-Qaeda in the country. And now that 3,000 civilians are killed, well, 2,500 or something, civilians are killed. Oh, now we'll tell you what we were keeping from you. And so I think that is really the true nature of why September 11th. Oh, I should also add, too, this is also very important. And again, this is not, I'm not trying to give some limited hangout version of these guys. If someone could show me that Dick Cheney did this, I'll pull the trap door under him. I don't care. It's not what I'm about, but I'm just saying. And hell, I forgot which point I was going to make now. Pardon me. No. This is important. That every time the CIA, in the first 8 months of the W. Bush government, every time the CIA would say, hey, we got a real problem with bin Laden in Afghanistan and there's an upcoming al-Qaeda attack and this and that kind of thing, the neoconservatives, led by Paul Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby, that's in the Defense Department and in the Vice President's office, they would intervene and they would say, no. Those damn CIA fools, they're trying to distract you from Iraq. If we get bogged down in Afghanistan fighting this nobody, bin Laden, what's he going to do? Set off a truck bomb or something? If we get bogged down there, we're never going to get to Baghdad. Keep your eye on the prize. We got to attack Iraq. And so they deliberately deranked and quashed the kind of, they said Kofor Black had his hair on fire, said all the alarms are flashing red. Something's going to happen. And I think that, and that's how they knew that it was al-Qaeda that did it. And that's why it was such a fraud when they pretended not to know. Oh, maybe Saddam helped them do it. They knew all summer long an al-Qaeda attack was coming. Mm-hmm. They knew it wasn't Saddam Hussein that did it. And, and they knew, for that matter, the Taliban didn't do it. It was bin Laden and his friends that did it over the Taliban's objections that they would cause any more problems outside of Afghanistan as long as they were living there. And bin Laden just betrayed them and did it anyway. And we took the war. W. Bush let bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri escape from Tora Bora because he was too busy doing a regime change in Kabul against the guys that didn't do it. He lived free for another 10 years after that.
Yeah.
Zawahiri for another 20.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I know we could go on about this particular topic forever because unfortunately, it's been a forever war. And so it goes on, the history of which goes on and continues even to this day.
You know what? Can I ramble one more thing about that?
Sure.
This is why so many people were truthers. One of the major reasons people became immediately glommed onto this, because W. Bush said a bunch of cavemen from no man's land, from the town of Bedrock in Pashtunistan, somehow had done this to us. But that's just stupid. That's crazy. Bin Laden was the son of a billionaire from Saudi Arabia. The Bin Laden group is the Halliburton. In other words, the major construction firm that does contracts for the national government of Saudi Arabia. He had a degree in engineering. His partner, Zawahiri, was a heart surgeon. The guys who were the lead hijackers were Egyptian upper middle class students studying engineering in Hamburg who got recruited to fly those planes. It was Arabs that did that. Well-educated, worldly educated Arabs who did that attack. Their core group of leaders were hiding out in Afghanistan among a bunch of cavemen. But Bush said it was a bunch of cavemen that did it, and they hate us because we're free and we love our mamas and apple pies. And people thought that's just crazy. That can't be what's really going on here. And then they saw how ruthlessly they exploited the attack to go on to Iraq and to the rest of the Middle East. And they said, oh, I see what's going on here. Yeah. Right. But that's because the way that the Bush government conflated al-Qaeda and the Taliban together, that worked on the truthers themselves, too. So it was the idea that the Taliban had attacked us that seemed so absurd that they were rejecting. Whereas if the story had been told straight, it was bin Laden and his 400 men hiding out there, many of whom who are Arabs who have been to college and know what they're doing, are professional mercenaries. Some of them trained how to make bombs by the CIA back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. That was who was behind it. That's a much more plausible story to understand. And so I think people kind of on an emotional level, they said, what do you mean some caveman attacked me from as far as you could get from here?
Right.
For no reason at all, you know?
Right. That does sound unbelievable. And so, yeah, certainly can see where people would begin to very much question the narratives. But that's what our government leaves us to do because they're never straight with us on really anything.
Exactly. So even when they're right, they're lying.
Right. And so we always have to question the narratives no matter what. I think it's healthy. So I don't blame anybody ever. I do it all the time, question every narrative.
Sure, of course.
Because most of them end up being bull, unfortunately. So, Scott, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, just really, you just have so much knowledge. And which is why, I love going to your website, antiwar.com. Definitely, I want to read your book. I don't read nearly enough, and I need to. So
you'll love it.
This one, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. I also want to read your other book about the Afghan. That's the one about the war in Afghanistan specifically, right?
Right, Fool's Errand.
Yeah.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
It started out as chapter 2 of Enough Already, and then it kind of got out of control and became its own book.
And
then I went back and wrote Enough Already.
I can see how that happens. You've got so much information.
Get Enough Already, get to chapter 2, then read Fool's Errand, and then pick Enough
then come
Already.
Back. Got it. So it's okay. All right, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott Horton.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.